All right, so today we're talking about what I learned from using my Sony FX3 as my main photography camera for the last few weeks. Let's jump right into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Desmond, and I make content for creatives that want to take better photos and shoot better videos. And today, we're talking about all the things that I learned using my Sony FX3, which is normally a dedicated video camera, as my photography camera. And there are three things I discovered where my Sony FX3 actually excels over my Sony A7R IV when it comes to taking photographs. Okay, so I think some of you are probably asking, why would you go and use your Sony FX3 as a primary photography camera? It is obviously not built for that. In all honesty, I just wanted to see how this thing handled itself as my main photo camera. Again, sometimes it's a bit of a pain carrying two camera bodies, my FX3 and my A7R IV. So sometimes if I'm doing a video heavy day, I want to be able to bring this, but also know that I can lean on it when I want to take thumbnails, when I want to take snapshots or portraits or any type of photography. And I wanted to test it out for the last couple weeks to see how this thing performed. And it was interesting to see that the FX3, being a primarily video-centric camera, performed when it came to photos, which was not surprising. It has the same 12 megapixel sensor that you find in the A7S III, which people love taking photographs with. The big downside, which you'll notice here, is that there is no viewfinder on the FX3. So that was something I had to get used to, but I did discover that was pretty helpful in certain situations. So let's jump into the first scenario where I would use my FX3 over my A7R IV. And I think it's probably the most obvious, right? It's in low light situations. This, like I said, is a 12 megapixel CMOS sensor. My A7R IV is a 61 megapixel sensor. And again, what that means on this side is with the 12 megapixels, these are 12 large megapixels, which take in a lot more light, which means it performs a lot better in low light scenarios, which is why people love shooting videos with the FX3, because you don't need a lot of artificial lighting. This thing performs incredibly well at night in dimly lit situations and still provides very usable footage. Now on the photography side, that is very much the same. Pair that with my favorite photography lens, which is the 35mm G Master f1.4, and you have a low light beast, right? You have the f1.4 wide open aperture, plus the incredible low light capabilities of the FX3, and shooting photographs indoors at night is incredible. Very usable photos. And with the 12 megapixels, you are reducing the amount of noise that shows up in those photos at higher ISOs. And the second scenario where I would pick my FX3 up over my A7R IV is for shooting vertical content. This flippy screen is awesome for shooting vertical photos and videos. Again, because I can hold it like so, I can have the screen down here and I get a better viewing angle. With the A7R IV, as much as I love that tilting screen, the challenge is when you're shooting vertical, especially if you're trying to get the camera down lower, your viewing angle isn't great. Now with this full articulating screen, you get perfect viewing angles regardless of whether or not you're shooting vertical or horizontal content. But for a lot of you shooting vertical content for social media, this is really, really helpful. And this is another place where the FX3 excels over the A7R IV. Now you couple that with the 12 megapixel sensor, it's perfectly fine. 12 megapixels is, for the most part, kind of overkill for social media. You're gonna get incredibly crisp, high resolution images. That'll get compressed by Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media platform you're using anyways, but they'll still look great. And then that leads me to the third place where the FX3 tends to excel over the A7R IV when it comes to photography. And that's when you're trying to do something for a fast workflow. A7R IV is an incredible photography camera that is my main go-to choice, but the 61 megapixel photographs are over 100 megabytes per RAW file. That makes it incredibly challenging for some of the older machines or maybe even iPads to process at high speeds. Now with these 12 megapixel photos, you can process these images much faster. If you are in a rush, if you just want to get something up for social media, if you want to just spam on the trigger and grab as many photos as you want and then sift through those later, The FX3 or an A7S III, something with a smaller sensor, is going to deliver much smaller files, which means you can process them faster, you can get through them a lot quicker, and they don't take up as much storage. I have to use a 10 terabyte hard drive to back up all of the files that come out of my A7R IV. I don't mind it, but they are large images. So when you're trying to process A7R IV photos on, say, an older MacBook or maybe even an older iPad that isn't an iPad Pro, you're gonna run into performance issues. You will run into none of that with the Sony FX3 or an A7S III. And for some types of photographers, if you're purely shooting for social media or you want something quick, this is going to be the camera I pick up. And again, you've probably seen it in other reviews, especially on the A7S III. The megapixel size doesn't make that big of a difference depending on the type of shooting you like. I've said it before in some of my videos, I prefer the A7R IV for most of my photography because I like to be able to crop in. I like to be able to have one image with as much detail as possible so that in the future, if I wanted to do a hyper crop, if I wanted to make changes or print it out incredibly large, I can do that. 99% of the time, most photographers probably get away with the images that come out of a Sony FX3. Now, the biggest downside though, like I've mentioned before, and probably the reason why I will still always default to my A7R IV, is the lack of viewfinder. That is not the fault of the FX3. This thing is not designed to be a photography-centric camera. It is designed to be video-centric, which is what I use it for mostly. But not having the viewfinder, I found myself in challenging situations when I was trying to shoot in bright scenarios. The flippy screen works great in crowded places where I don't want to get the camera up to my face, or in, restaurants or things where I just want to quickly pull the camera out and like aim and shoot and get the shot. But for things where I want to be more precise, things where I really want to get dialed into my shot, or if it's like bright out and I want to be able to see everything that's going on, you really can't replace a viewfinder. The A7R IV and that viewfinder is incredible. So the question is, will I switch up my entire workflow to have this as my primary photography camera? No, I will not. But for the most part, when I'm out and about and I want to grab a camera body, I don't really have to think that hard between the A7R IV or the FX3. I just decide, is it going to be really photocentric or is it really going to be video centric? And I can pick up either one. The FX3 does a great job shooting photos when I needed to shoot photos. And as you can see, the A7R IV also does a great job shooting videos. So really it just depends on my preference, but I wanted to test it out. I wanted to know that this thing was truly capable and that the output was something that I'd be happy with. And for the most part, it really is. And that is my quick video on what I learned from using the Sony FX3 as my main photo camera for the last few weeks. I will catch you all in the next one.